Professor Camus, thank you very much for joining our interview series. Let me start right away with the first question. What is the significance of National Rally's success in the history of the Fifth French Republic? What awaits France if National Rally wins the second round of elections, which will probably lead to cohabitation?
Well, the significance of this situation where the National Rally polled more than 30% on the first round of an election to the lower house of parliament is huge. It's the first time in the history of the Fifth Republic that the extreme right comes ahead of the polls. You know, back in the 1980s, we used to say in political science that the extreme right was dead, that it came to its end in 1945 because of the victory against fascism and Nazi Germany. And most political scientists considered that it would not be able to resuscitate because there was so much anger from the citizens at what fascism stood for. And in spite of this, what we have seen, especially at the time of Jean-Marie Le Pen, that is between 1972 and 2011, is a party coming from the extreme right with some very extreme people and some very extreme statements, slowly changing from a small fringe movement to a party that first of all began by pulling 10% of the votes and 15% of the vote, then 20%, came to the second round of the presidential election in 2002, and more or less normalized with Marine Le Pen, so that today it is seen as, I would say, a far-right party, especially on immigration issues and law and order. But I mean, the legacy of fascism and the historical extreme right is no more. I mean, the generation of people who have known the Second World War is now dead. So the people at the helm of the party are very young. Jordan Bardella is only age 28. So for most French people, this is only a far-right party with a law and order and an anti-immigration agenda.
How do you explain the enormous success of National Rally, both in the European Parliament elections on June 9 and in the first round of French parliamentary elections held on June 30th?
What is particularly striking is that the National Rally came ahead among all segments of the population, from the people aged between 18 to 25 to pension people, elderly people, from the upper middle class to the working class, so that there are no mainstream in almost all segments of French society. The vote for this party can be partly explained by the disaffection of voters with mainstream parties, whether it be the socialist, social democrat left, Macron's party, of course, which is very clearly sanctioned by the voters, and the mainstream conservative right, les Républicains, which polls only 10% of the votes. So you have to realize that the party of Jacques Chirac, the party of Nicolas Sarkozy, the party of François Fillon, which used to be a huge conservative party, being in power many times under the Fifth Republic, is now practically dead. So the anger of most people at the social and economic policies of Macron gave the National Rally many, many votes. But it would be a mistake to think this is only a protest vote, because when a party is so strong for over 50 years, it cannot be only a protest. So, first of all, it's a vote that is because our society is less and less egalitarian, in the sense that, in France, we have some kind of a passion for equality, which doesn't mean we want everybody to earn the same wage and have the same education and so on. But it's like the Republic enables anyone from every walk of life to climb up the social ladder. And when you, for example, belong to the working class, your son or your daughter can belong to the middle class, and then you move from the middle class to the upper class and so on. This is no more possible, or less and less possible. The inequalities in terms of revenue, in terms of education, are no bigger than they were in the 1980s. The second point is many citizens resent the fact that they have the impression that there is an elite, a political elite, a media elite, an elite of the economy, and on the other side there is the common folk, and the gap between them two is widening. So it seems to the National Front voters that democracy is not really a democracy, because everything is into the hands of a small group of people. That's the way they see things. I mean, I do not say that this is the truth, but nevertheless, this is the way most voters of the National Rally see French society. And there is also a wide resentment against foreigners, and especially against people who came to this country with North African, West African, Middle Eastern background. The voters for the National Rally are those who, condone the idea of a kind of a shock of civilizations. They think that assimilation into French society, especially assimilation of Muslim people from abroad, is not what it should be. It's true that we have also suffered many terror attacks from radical Islamic groups, and this has, I think, played a very significant role in making, for example, many conservative voters who used to vote for Les Républicains more hardline and more focused on the clash of civilization issue. Many of those voters went to Éric Zemmour in his Reconquest party, but Éric Zemmour's party is now almost dead. It polled 0.7% in the election to parliament. So those votes also go to the National Rally. And this is the vote of people who say the boat is full. We should stop immigration altogether.
In what ways has the Gaullist tradition and its emphasis on national sovereignty shaped the contemporary far-right and populist radical right movements in France?
Sovereignty is a key word, because you might remember that at the time of General de Gaulle, this was also a key word in his policies. At that time, we had the common market, not the EU. And the common market, which is more or less what the National Rally wants to go back to, was a loose association of nation states cooperating on a selected issue, selected projects. But it did not change the fact that each and every country in the common market had its own sovereignty. On foreign policy, on the economy, there was no common currency, and the French legislation, was not superseded by legislation from the European Union. Nowadays, 80% of what is voted in Parliament has to be up to the standards that are set by the EU. So sovereignty is more or less limited. We still retain sovereignty, of course. We are totally free to send our troops to any place if we want to, and not to send our troops to some place if we do not want to. But many citizens think that the EU is something that's very far away from them, that is imposing constraints on our sovereignty. We now have a common currency. We are now obliged to, I would say, agree with our European partners on most important issues. Our agriculture depends on funding from the EU and so on. So it's true that the EU project aims at superseding the sovereignty of member states to some extent. And I mean, you also have to keep in mind that, of course, there's a legacy of the Gaullist era and this passion for sovereignty. But it has also to do with the fact that France used to be a huge superpower. We were a superpower in the sense that we had colonies all around the world. And I mean, we really had the notion of France being one of the most important countries in the world in terms of budget, military forces, and influence. Nowadays, our influence is less. It doesn't mean that France cannot send a message to the world in terms of values. It doesn't mean that we count for nothing on the international scene, but we are a medium-sized power, really. And I mean, it's very good to be a medium-sized power. It can bring many positive things, but for example, if you speak to National Front voters, they will lament the fact that we used to be one of the biggest countries in the world, and we have lost this kind of, well, we've lost our colonial empire, first of all, and they have a sense of decadency, you know, which I personally do not fear, but they are longing for the past.
Given the current political landscape and the shift towards illiberalism, how do you assess the role of cultural and historical factors in shaping the political agendas of far-right movements in France today?
The National Rally is a good example of what a liberal democracy would be if it were in power. Cultural factors, yes. The first cultural factor is the fact that in France, becoming French means assimilating to a set of values. We are not Canada or the United States. We are not the United Kingdom, where you can retain part of your cultural, religious background and say, I am Italian American, Afro-American, Arab American, Jewish American. In France, we do not think that way. We have a set of values that means assimilation, and assimilation is basically forgetting about your past, forgetting about your past identity, and acting like religion is confined into your home, into your mind. And I mean, we have separation of churches and state, which means that the secular state is very important. So when population came from non-European countries with a different set of values, many French people resented this as an attack on our own cultural model. Then comes history. History in France means, of course, looking back at the colonial part of our country. Our relations with Algeria, for example, our relations with Morocco to a lesser extent, have to do with the colonial part of this country. And you know that when it comes to Algeria, for example, Algeria became independent in 1962 after a war that began in 1954 actually, which was a civil war, both in Algeria and in mainland France, with an attempted coup d'etat in 1961, with many casualties on both sides, with the army going to Algeria to win over the guerrilla movement of the pro-independence fighters. So how do you want to have, I would say, a sane relationship with Algeria when we have not yet overcome the burden of the past? That's a big problem. So this is history. Of course, we also have issues with other countries of our former colonial empire. Maybe the burden of the past is less with West African countries especially, but still, I mean, they were colonized, and they, for example, some of those countries want us to apologize for colonization. And among the voters for the National Rally, 99% of the voters are, I would say, quite nostalgic of France as it used to be at the time of the colonial empire. They do not want to apologize. They do not want to pay reparations and so on. So we are still a country which has to do a lot of work on itself with regard to the past.
How do you assess the evolution of National Rally under Marine Le Pen's leadership, particularly in terms of its normalization process and its success in attracting voters from Les Républicains? Can you provide us a historical perspective? Has the normalization or mainstreaming of National Rally been successful in attracting the votes of the French middle class?
The so-called normalization of the National Rally can be seen by the fact that opinion surveys today show that less than 50% of the French think that the National Rally is a threat to democracy. At the time Jean-Marie Le Pen was the chair of the party, more than 70% of the French say this party is a threat to our democracy. Why is this change? Well, first of all, because when Marine Le Pen became chairperson in 2011, it was obvious that she did not share her father's ideology. She's not an anti-Semite. She does not say that she belongs in the inequality of races. She does not deny the harm that Nazi Germany did to France. So, of course, when compared to her own father, Marine Le Pen is more moderate. Nevertheless, she is the only political leader who wants to stop immigration and make France some kind of a fortress close to any kind of immigration. So she is radical, but she is less radical than her father used to be. And slowly, this normalization process grew on because new generations came to the National Rally, generations that did not had any political activity at the time of Le Pen's father. So they did not know anything about what the party was about in the 80s and 90s. And they are not obsessed that much with the history of the past. They come to this party because they are disillusioned with the mainstream political spectrum, and they also resent immigration, but not in the same way Le Pen did. So very slowly, this party became more or less mainstream. Marine Le Pen is seen by a majority of the French as a political leader who is very much like the average citizen. There is very big criticism of other politicians who seem too distant, too aloof, too far away from the everyday preoccupations of the average citizen. Marine Le Pen is seen as someone who cares about the spending power of fellow citizens, with the fact that many lost their job, that many factories have closed, and so on and so forth. She seems closer to the people. And this is, of course, very attractive to the middle class, because the middle class nowadays is the one who is, I mean, it's the class that pays the more taxes, the class whose income is rising very, very slowly or not rising at all. It's also the class of people who cannot tell their children that tomorrow they will achieve something better than their own parents did. So the middle class is in a quite bad situation, actually, because on the one hand, you have a segment of the French population who is making huge gains from globalization, financial markets, and so on. And you have the working class who gets social benefits and sometimes does not even pay taxes on the income, because they do not earn a sufficient amount of income to pay taxes. And those in the middle, I mean, they feel the burden of taxation, and they do not feel that they are represented.
The transnational connections of illiberal movements have been in the spotlight for a considerable of time. Do you think trans-European strategies have been successful so far for European illiberal groups and their leaders? In your opinion, what challenges do they face in maintaining a cohesive front within the European Parliament?
The main challenge they have in the European Parliament is that they are nowadays split into two political factions: the Identity and Democracy group, which is that of Marine Le Pen, and the European Conservatives and Reformers, the ECR group, which is that of Mrs. Meloni. Other people, such as Mr. Orban, do not sit on any political group at this very time. They might join one or another. And, you know, those parties are nationalist parties, which means that, in fact, they do not care very much about establishing strong links with foreign groups, because at some point there can be clashes between them. For example, if you want to put in the same room an Hungarian nationalist and a Romanian nationalist, the issue of the Hungarian minority in Romania will come on the table, and they will not agree. And if you want to put in the same room Italian nationalists and Austrian nationalists, the issue of the Southern Tyrol province will come on the table, and so on and so forth. So the truth is that in each and every parliament in the world, you have to belong to some group, because this gives you an enormous amount of money. It gives you jobs. It gives you the ability to convene meetings at the headquarters of the European Parliament. It enables you to travel and meet with your fellow nationalists. So if you do not belong to any group, you're basically totally alone in the Parliament. Even when it comes to floor time, the time you are entitled to speak in the Parliament, if you do not belong to any group, you will have a very short slot of time. If you belong to a group, the group will be given, I would say, a given slot of time that is proportional to the number of seats they have. So you gain visibility. You gain the capacity to speak on the floor. So that's a very good reason to put aside ideological differences and national differences and sit on the same group. There is talk of those two parties, ECR and ID, join a common, some kind of supergroup of the liberal nationalist parties. But basically, there are too many personal ambitions, too many differences between those parties. Like, for example, let's imagine those two groups merge into a single one. Who will be the leading figure? Will it be Mrs. Le Pen? Will it be Mrs. Meloni? Will it be Mr. Orban? And I mean, in fact, they do not have that many reasons to merge, really. So I think we will have in the next legislature at the EP at least the two existing groups, ID and ECR, and probably a third one, because the German AfD can no longer sit with the French National Rally. Marine Le Pen does not want her party to be associated with the AfD. So the AfD is working on building another group which would be more far-right, even more far-right, with the Hungarians from the Mirazank party, with some parties from Eastern Europe, with maybe the Forum for Democracy in the Netherlands. The difficulty is that if you want to be a group in the EP, you have to, first of all, get 25 members, 25, but also from 1/3 of the member countries. So you must meet those two criteria to have a group. 25 is quite easy to get, but you have also to bring people from different countries, and sometimes it can be a difficulty.
Given the historical context of foreign influences on European politics, how do you view the role of USA and Russian influences on the National Rally and other far-right movements in France today? Can you elaborate especially on the role of Putin regime in consolidating the role of far-right parties and illiberal movements?
When it comes to the National Rally, one very important piece of their agenda is that they want France to withdraw from the military command of NATO. That's very important because basically when we send all troops abroad, and we saw that in the Sahel in Africa, we sent all troops under French command, but we had to rely on the intelligence gathered by the United States and sometime by the UK. So those were all troops, but they had to rely on satellite intelligence that came from all partners within NATO. The second point is, what does the National Rally want with regard to the Ukraine-Russia war? Bardella said, Russia is a multidimensional enemy. That's what he said 1 week ago on a TV debate. But very soon after, he said, it's an enemy, but I will not send French troops to train and help Ukrainian soldiers, and I shall not allow France to sell missiles to the Ukraine, because those missiles might kill Russian civilians in Russian cities. Usually, in terms of strategy, when you say this or that country is an enemy, you need to support the other side. In that case, if you say Russia is the enemy, you have to support the Ukraine. If you support the Ukraine, but you say you will not send troops, and you will not send the necessary weapons that will enable the Ukraine to win the war over Russia, basically you're turning your back on the Ukraine, and you are more in favor of Russia than of the Ukraine. Well, it's not only a matter of the national rally having in the past had to rely on Russian money to run the party. Of course, they did borrow money from a Russian bank. But I mean, money does not dictate their relationship to Russia. They, in fact, are supportive of Russia because they think that the Russian regime stands for the same values, the values of authoritarian democracy, a very strong leader, some kind of a vertical way of ruling the country. They think that Russia stands for traditional family values. Russia stands for a multipolar world. It also stands for law and order. It stands for fighting Islamism, even in Russia itself. And it's like they think Russia is the country where traditional European values are still those of the government. In other terms, they think the West is too liberal and Russia is the most traditional country on our continent.
And lastly, Professor, yeah. Lastly, in an article you wrote for Le Monde Diplomatique back in 2014 with the title, "Not Your Father's Far Right," you argue that extensive research into far-right populism over the last 30 years has yet to find a precise, workable definition for this catch-all term, and we need more information on the political category it covers. Revisiting the debate in 2024, do you think we now have a workable definition for populism?
Oh, no, we do not have much more than we did back in 2002. The scholars do not agree on a common definition of populism. Basically, there's no consensus on the fact that there exists two kinds of different populism. Populism from the left, which, for example, in France, is embodied in Jean-Luc Mélenchon's La France Insoumise, and populism from the right. The only difference is, well, both of them want to bypass representative democracy and go to direct democracy. Have the people vote through referenda on all major issues. But what is specific to far-right populism is the xenophobic agenda. It is the fact that they scapegoat foreign cultures, foreigners, immigrants, refugees, from everything that goes wrong in this country. I mean, the populist far left does not say that we should have different rights for native French people and for documented foreigners. The National Rally makes this issue the cornerstone of their agenda. So that is the very core difference, xenophobia.
Professor Camus, thank you so very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.